Today we are talking about debt and getting out of debt specifically, but we'll also touch on some other things later in the video called assets and liabilities. And this is where you could actually start understanding the difference between good debt and bad debt. Now, if you are a person who struggles with debt, if you're somebody who is in over their head, don't even worry about good debt. It's not for you right now. You really need to develop self-discipline first. But this is one area where Dave Ramsey and I would really disagree. He's one of the big financial gurus who teaches how to get out of debt really well. I take some of his good principles, but I've adjusted them a little bit because not everybody is bad with money. Not everybody is bad with debt. And if you know how to leverage debt well, it can actually really help you in the long run. But debt in general can be a dangerous thing, especially if you haven't built the systems in place and don't know how to control yourself. So, one concept I want to first cover for you guys is, what does debt do? And I want to give you this picture because it helps you understand really what's happening when you take on debt. Debt is essentially stealing from your future. It's stealing your future for your present. And so when you think about that in those terms, every time you take on debt, you are giving something up in the future. And I would even say probably more so than that, you're stealing from your future, but you're also stealing future growth as well. And so I've created a little bit of a diagram. This is not like a perfectly accurate diagram. It's not really meant to have data on it. It's more just a concept. So look at this diagram. When you take on debt, your available income drops significantly, and therefore your growth, what you can invest, what you can grow, drops significantly. And so you're effectively stealing from your future for your present. If you do not take on debt and you just simply invest the money or you pay cash for things, you can allow your available income to grow. And there's a massive difference. This chart really doesn't even do it justice. In all honesty, I did this just so you can kind of see what's happening as a concept. But really, if you look over 30 years, there is a massive difference between people who have taken on debt and are living paycheck to paycheck because they're trying to have nice things now versus the people who care more about investing and are trying to limit debt or have no debt and invest the money otherwise. So that's the first really big concept I want you to understand. Debt is stealing from your future for your present. That's exactly what debt is. And oftentimes it gives a much, much worse return than what you think it might pay. So now we're going to cover, how do you pay debt off most effectively? There's a couple different ways out there. I really like the Dave Ramsey model. I think there's a lot of wisdom in it, and it helps give you momentum, which I think is important, especially if you're starting from, deep in the mud of debt. You need a little bit of oomph, a little bit of momentum to get yourself out of debt. And so what I propose is Dave Ramsey's debt snowball. And so what happens, I'll give you this in the PDF document, but you can list out your debts and you list them from least to greatest or greatest to least, whichever you want. And then also list the percentages, your interest rates. All debts have interest rates. There are very, very few out there, unless it's maybe a family loan that might not cost interest, but most do. So list those out. And I would say pay off the smallest debts first. This is the Dave Ramsey model. Now, you might think, man, why would you do that? If I have a higher interest rate, shouldn't I pay the higher interest rate off first? Maybe. And this is where, the more technical questions might be helpful to talk to somebody specifically, a financial advisor, or you could drop your comments in below and I'll try to answer them. Or if you work at Qore, you can come talk to me. But in general, you want to pay off the smallest ones first. And again, it's about momentum. Just getting something started and then letting it build is more important. So if you can quickly pay off a small debt, you can use the balance that you would have paid toward that now toward another debt. So it frees up some cash in your monthly expenditures to shift that money toward another debt to pay that debt off then. And so what happens is you can pay off the small ones quickly and start working your way toward the bigger ones. The other debts, so let's say you really try to attack the smallest one first. The others, you're paying the minimum payments until you could get that as like your next focused debt that you're trying to knock off. And really, I would encourage you guys to look at this to obliterate debt, to kill debt. You got to kind of be a little crazy to just go after it and crush it. There are people who will take on extra jobs, babysit, do these different things to pay off debt quickly. And I think that's wise, that's smart. Debt is enslaving. It kills you, and it really, really limits your stability, your financial stability, and it really limits your financial growth opportunities. Now, this is bad debt. We'll get to good debt in just a little bit, but in general, most debt is bad debt. It's stealing from your future for something in the present, and usually that thing in the present is not actually even worth it. It's not worth it. So, if you want to pause the video or do this after, take time to write down your debts and total them up, figure out what you're owing, what the minimum payments are, and then also list them from low to high. So you've got a hit list, you know which ones to go after, and just bang, bang, boom. The other things too, I think it's good to ask some questions. When do you want to have all this paid off by? Set goals. Goals are really, really important. There's that adage, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right? So if you don't have goals, I want to knock out all of my debt by the end of the year, or in 2 years, I want to be completely debt free. You likely won't be as aggressive. You likely won't meet those kinds of goals if you don't set aggressive goals and make plans to get there. The other thing I would ask is, what might you have to give up to get there quickly? This can kind of be brought in with a budget conversation, right? Maybe you need to tighten your budget and put more toward paying down debt, or maybe you need to get a side hustle. Maybe you and your spouse need to talk through things and get on the same page, and give up, a date night once a month or something so you could pay a little more down toward the debt. And then also, would it be worth it if it sets you up to build generational wealth? If you could get debt free, wouldn't that be worth the freedom and the ability to provide generational wealth for your kids and your grandkids? I would say it's totally, totally worth it. So think through those things. Make a plan, get out of debt. Now, part two, here we're talking about good debt, potentially. But first, we're going to talk about assets and liabilities. Assets and liabilities. So there's different variations or definitions of exactly what an asset and a liability is. And so it can vary slightly, but in general, an asset is something that puts money in your pocket. All right, think of it in terms of it is providing you with value. It doesn't have to be money directly. It could be something that's growing in value, but that is an asset. A liability is something that costs you money. All right. So a car, let's think about a car for a second. Is a car an asset or a liability? In general, it's almost always a liability, right? Cars depreciate in value, and then you pay for maintenance, you pay for gas, you pay for repairs, all those kinds of things. You pay for insurance. It is a liability. It costs you things. In the very rare circumstances, maybe a collectible car that you don't drive, you don't have a license plate for it because you're just holding it for the value, maybe that could be an asset. But I would say you really got to know the car industry really well to find an asset in the car market. Now, what about a home? Is a home an asset or a liability? In most markets, in most cases, it varies. I would say if it's your personal home, generally that is a liability. Yeah, you heard me right. Generally, your personal home is a liability. And there's a little more to that story I'll kind of cover just in general, but when can it be an asset? It can be an asset if it's a rental home or it's generating income for you, right? If it's an investment property, then that home or property or whatever it is can be an asset. So generally what you want to look at is it providing you value? Is it putting money in your pocket, or is it costing you things? And specifically with a home, this is one of the areas where you can have what I would consider good debt or okay debt. Now in America, this is not necessarily for Tunisians out there, I'm sorry. The information's a little different and it's a little more specific. But in America, you can get a really good mortgage, a 30-year mortgage with a really low interest rate. Right now, interest rates are higher. They're like 6.5% or so. But not too long ago, you could get a 30-year mortgage for about 3%. That is an incredible rate. And so if you could purchase a home, with 20% down, a rental property, and you have a mortgage on it, that's debt. Mortgage is debt. But in most cases, if you're a savvy investor or you're trying to be careful, you can find a good investment property that's going to generate more cash flow than what you owe for the mortgage. You could pay your mortgage, you could pay your insurance, you could pay your property taxes, you could pay a property manager, and still have some left over and create a buffer so that if you have a month without a renter, you need to make repairs, you could still cover that stuff. That is doable. And that's where I would say debt can be okay. But there are certain things, certain categories where it's really specific. And I would say mortgages are a really unique type of debt. The government really encourages you to invest in real estate and gives you a lot of benefits. Now, it's the American government. Not all countries are created equal. Not all countries offer the same kinds of benefits. If you're American and you want to know more about this, real estate is an awesome, awesome tool to build wealth. I'd love to talk more about that, but I won't cover that in this video. What about a telephone? Is a telephone an asset or a liability? In general, it's a liability. If you really, really need it and it helps you make money for your work, maybe it could be an asset. But in general, it's a liability. Computer, same thing. In general, it's a liability. It's going to decrease in value. The one exception is if you need it for work and it helps you do your work, then it can kind of be viewed as an asset. But in general, toys, entertainment, traveling, all liabilities. Now, not all liabilities are bad. Groceries technically are liabilities, right? But the key here is to focus in on what liabilities do you have in your life and what are the necessary liabilities. Then maybe consider what assets do you have in your life? Do you have any? And then what assets are available to you to get? I would really encourage you guys to shift away from liabilities and move toward assets. Wealthy people think in terms of assets and liabilities, and they try to limit their liabilities and increase their assets. In fact, they try to get their assets to pay for their liabilities. That's the whole point, right? And so you'll hear a lot of really wealthy people that do not own their home. Yeah. I mean, millionaires, I know billionaires that do not own their home. Why? Because owning your personal home generally is a liability. If they rent it, or they sometimes will have different structures to where a company owns it and it's creating wealth for them and they're renting it from the company, what it can do is still give them the freedom of renting and it's not a personal liability. That's another conversation for another time, but in general, that's the conversation between assets and liabilities. Once you kind of understand these things, then you can consider, what in your life is costing you money. Maybe you need to cut some of those things off and then shift toward things that can increase your cash flow, can make you money. And then also, you can start understanding good debt and bad debt and seeing if there's good opportunities that will actually help you grow because you can take good debt and buy assets with it that will actually provide you money, and you can avoid bad debt better. I will say one more thing because this is really important. It's best to get out of bad debt before you get into good debt. And there's a lot of reasons there. One, your credit score will go up if you're American. I don't know if Tunisia has similar systems or not. Whatever country you might be listening in from, it could be different. But in general, you want to pay off all of your bad debt first. Get debt free. Then, once you've paid off debt, you've built some discipline, and you understand good debt versus bad debt, then you might be in a position to start leveraging good debt. But I would still give a warning if you are a person who gets out of hand with spending or you really struggle with the self-discipline of financial tools. I'd be really, really careful even with good debt because you can get yourself in a pickle if you're not careful, if you're not responsible with that. Finally, I want to give a little example of ways you could leverage good debt. So I kind of briefly mentioned buying a rental property. Here's what it could look like. All right, let's say in Tunisia, because this is made for Qore employees primarily, you could find a home, put a down payment, and you could take on a mortgage payment of about 600 dinars per month, where you're paying for this property. Let's say it's a studio somewhere, right? And you can pay your taxes, everything you need to pay, about 600 dinar a month. I don't really know what prices are where you're listening to. It may vary, but this is just the principle, right? Let's say though, in that market, that same place can rent for 1,000 dinar a month, right? The rent usually is higher than a mortgage payment in most countries. And it's because the renter is paying for the freedom of not having to take care of the asset, maintain the asset. It's the freedom of being able to move easily, not being tied down to a place. And so generally rents are higher than mortgage payments. So what happens? Well, you as the landlord, if you're the one doing the property management, would collect that 1,000 dinar a month in rent. You'd pay your property taxes, your mortgage, everything you need. If there's little repairs, you need to pay that out of that as well. And then you keep the leftover. You get 400 dinars a month net. And that's an asset that's growing for you. It's an investment. So this is one way to look at it. I know in Tunisia, the margins, the differences between, mortgage and rent might not be the same. This is just the concept, ways that you can look to take good debt, invest it, leverage banks' money, and get net passive income from it. So hopefully this is helpful. I know this was a little bit longer, but this is the training really on debt, getting out of debt, and understanding liabilities and assets.